I'm wondering just in terms of Canada's climate targets, can there be a situation, do you think, where, not to say that Alberta should just maintain the status quo, but I just feel like even when, the federal government back, what was it, 2015, 2016, when they announced the Pan-Canadian framework on climate change, these frameworks in some ways don't always work because there's not real good coordination or planning. It's really tricky. I understand, obviously, to get provinces and the federal government to work in sync on something. But if you were to take a real pan-Canadian approach, and it's like, okay, we got to hit this target as a country, can there be a scenario where Alberta, because it still needs to support the country economically, and this transition for Alberta is going to be challenging, can there be a situation where Alberta maybe doesn't have to transition as quickly, and then the rest of the country can kind of decarbonize a little bit more in a more accelerated fashion or so, just so that we can potentially hit the target? I know you said Alberta makes up 25% of our emissions, so I'm not sure how we do that, but can there be a scenario like that, if you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So you nailed it when you said, I'm not sure how we would do that, because this is when the math breaks. If you want to hit Canada's very aggressive emissions reduction target, 40 to 45% below 2005 levels by 2030 and 2030. I think it's actually an unrealistic target, but I understand, like, that's what the science says. If we want to keep global warming within safe levels, we all have to do our fair share, and that's Canada's fair share. So you can't do that without Alberta being on board, because it accounts for 25% of emissions. But you've nailed the issue. Okay, well, but how do we do that when, these emissions are being driven by oil and gas production that provides livelihoods, royalties, taxes, all these things, not just for Alberta, but for the Canadian economy. And it's really hard for any politician to say, when times are really good, okay, now we're going to intervene and we're going to, turn up the good times, and we're going to turn that dial the other way. So we're going to, basically turn it down and make livelihoods worse and make economic contribution less. That is a really tough thing to do as a politician. You can do that. Yeah. The industry is struggling. Politicians do this all the time. They might put the final nail in the coffin. No problem. When times are good, it's tough for a politician to do that. So then we've got this trade-off, and you've nailed the trade-off between economic prosperity and jobs and schools and hospitals and all of this versus achieving our climate targets. So a perfectly plausible or reasonable course is to say, yeah, I'm not a politician. I'm not going to turn down the industry and take all that away. I need the tax revenue. So we're going to treat that industry more lightly, and we'll try to go harder in other provinces. They won't like it, but so be it. It's a perfectly reasonable approach to take. But then you have to be upfront and honest and say, and that will come at the expense of us reaching our climate targets. Right now, what we have is a lot of happy talk from politicians and from all parties at all levels saying we can do both, and not enough of a real honest conversation saying there is a trade-off there, and we should have a good public discussion on what do we want. And if it's we want to achieve our climate targets come hell or high water, then we'll go in and we'll turn down, the money spigot on that industry. And if we say, no, we like that money spigot fully open, then you'll say, okay, well, we're going to go to the next International Climate Summit and say, sorry, we're not going to make our climate targets.
And have to deal with that. Yeah.
Sure. And have to deal with it. And what is the blowback? With international conventions, there's no blowback. Like, no, the UN isn't going to invade Canada and take control of our energy infrastructure and do that, turn things down. There are very few punitive mechanisms in the global stage, apart from leaders not being able to hold their heads high in front of their peers, and a Canadian prime minister having to say, sorry, this is the nature of our economy. Like, we're too dependent on oil and gas, and we can't transition quickly enough.